Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this important discussion on Ryan's Law, a groundbreaking policy that grants terminally ill patients the right to access medical cannabis in healthcare facilities. We are going to explore how you can help expand this legislation in your state. My name is Nicole Hemingway, and I have the privilege of serving as the CEO of the U.S. Pain Foundation. At US Pain Foundation, our mission is to empower, educate, connect, and advocate for all people living with chronic pain, both children and adults. Today, we have a robust discussion ahead of us. We are going to cover an overview of Ryan's Law and its impact, the legal, medical, and advocacy challenges surrounding patient access to medical cannabis, and how you can support legislative efforts in your state. After our discussion, we're going to open the floor for a Q&A. So please jot down any questions you may have as we continue this conversation. So before we dive in, a few quick notes. This webinar is for educational purposes only. US Pain does not endorse any specific treatment, therapy, or product. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any medical decisions. The views expressed by our panelists are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the US Pain Foundation. And as mentioned, we will have time at the end to answer any questions. So you can submit those questions throughout the entire presentation by using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And know that this webinar is being recorded and will be available to you at a later date. So I am thrilled to introduce our guest panelists today, each of whom have been instrumental in advocating for patient rights and expanding access to medical cannabis. So let's meet them now. Jim Bartell is the founder and president of the Ryan's Law Foundation, as well as a public affairs expert with over 40 years of experience. After losing his son, Ryan, to terminal pancreatic cancer, Jim championed the passage of Ryan's Law, SB 311, in California, ensuring that terminally ill patients can access medical cannabis and hospice care. Now, through the Ryan's Law Foundation, he is leading efforts to expand this law nationwide. Jim is also a U.S. Navy veteran and co-founder of a government and public relations and strategic consulting service firm. Dr. Jill Simonian is a doctor of pharmacy with 25 years of experience at the VA hospital in La Jolla, California. After shifting to independent pharmacy work, she became deeply involved in cannabis medicine, recognizing the urgent need for evidence-based education. She now teaches cannabinoid pharmacology and therapeutics at UC San Diego and UC Irvine, and is a founding member of the Pharmacist Cannabis Coalition of California, advocating for safe and responsible cannabis policy. Ken Sobel is a seasoned attorney, consultant, and medical marijuana advocate with over 15 years in the cannabis industry. He founded the Green Halo, one of Arizona's first dispensaries, co-founded its first cannabis extraction company, and played a pivotal role in protecting the state's Medical Marijuana Act. In 2014, he won a landmark case adding post-traumatic stress disorder to Arizona's medical cannabis program, influencing national policy going forward. Now, as a senior attorney at Genesis International, he advises businesses and speaks at industry events. And finally, Ellen Lenox Smith is a leading advocate for chronic pain patients in Rhode Island. As co-director of US Pain's medical cannabis advocacy program, she has been a tireless voice for safe patient access to medical cannabis, working alongside her husband, Stu, to advance medical cannabis policy. Living with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and sarcoidosis, Ellen has endured 23 surgeries and continues her very personal fight for patient rights. She serves on the Rhode Island Patient Advocacy Coalition board, has authored 2 books, and has contributed to NIH research on Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So I am just so excited because we have such an esteemed panelist here with us today. And so we have a lot of questions. So I just want to, first of all, thank you all for being here with us. And let's quickly jump in. Jim, I'm actually going to start with you. Could you please share more about how Ryan's Law came about?
Sure. My son Ryan called me on March 1st of 2018 to let me know he'd been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer and had a few weeks to live. And after the shock and the tears, I flew up to Seattle, where he was located, and went to the hospital. He was asleep. I asked the nurse how long he would be asleep, and she said he's been asleep the whole entire time. We're giving him fentanyl because the morphine wasn't strong enough for his pain, and fentanyl just puts you out. So I spent the night in this room. He woke up the next morning in pain. I buzzed the nurse. She came in to give him another shot. For the first time, he realized I was there, and he squeezed my hand and said, "Dad, you need to get me off the fentanyl. I don't want to spend my last few weeks sleeping," because he had a wife and son and many family members and friends, and which he couldn't spend any time with if he was sleeping. So I promised him I'd work on that. Um, I talked to the doctor, the oncologist, about using medical cannabis to replace the fentanyl, since I have a background in working with dispensaries in California. And he thought it was a reasonable request. He said I have to run it up the chain of command. Um, it took him 3 weeks to get a final no. So 3 weeks of Ryan sleeping all the time. No visitors, no conversations. Uh, so I worked again with the same oncologist to find out if there was a hospital in Seattle that would allow medical cannabis, and he was aware of one. So we arranged for another week to have him transferred. So 4 weeks on fentanyl, 4 weeks of sleep, and we transferred him. The medical cannabis chemist came in with the medicines. We gave him his first dose that evening, and he said it was the biggest high he'd ever created. So he was going to spend the next couple of days there just to make sure he acclimated to it. Um, the next morning, he woke up wide awake, pain free. The nurse came in to give him a shot. He said he didn't need it. And for his last 3 weeks before he died, he was having visitors and having conversations on the phone and texting. He would sleep through the night pain free, wake up in the morning and spend the day fully alert and having great conversations with all of his friends and family. So after he passed away, I was so angry with the first hospital for not allowing him to use the medical cannabis. I felt they had taken away 4 weeks of his life unnecessarily. So I did about 3 months of research and a lot of it with the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, and because they do allow medical cannabis in their dispensary or in their clinics. And then I worked with Ken to create a bill to require that all hospitals allow terminally ill patients to use medical cannabis for treatment or pain relief. And spent the next few months locating a state senator in California. Decided to start in California because I'm well connected here politically. And Senator Ben Waso, agreed to sponsor it. We introduced it in February of 2019. And I went up every week to Sacramento to personally um, brief all 120 legislators, 40 in the Senate, 80 in the Assembly. And I insisted on meeting with the legislators themselves because I didn't want my message to lose its impact in translation from staff to legislator. So we got through all 120 after a few weeks. I went up and testified at hearings, as did Ken, and we went to a final vote in July of 2019. It passed the Assembly 80-0, and it passed the Senate 40-0. Unanimous bipartisan support. In fact, at the Senate hearing, the most conservative senator in California, Brian Jones, who was the minority whip, stood up and he said you all know I'm against cannabis, but this bill isn't about cannabis. It's about quality of life for people who are dying. He says that's why I'm supporting it. So with a unanimous vote, a bipartisan vote, it went to the governor in September. He vetoed it. And he wrote me a note saying he was reluctantly vetoing it because he had been convinced by the California Hospital Association that they would lose Medicare and Medicaid funding if they allowed it in the hospitals. And so I called the Senate Pro Tem. I asked her if we could do a veto override. And she said, you can, but you got to remember they have their own bills they want the governor to sign. They may not want to risk him opposing their bills if they supported yours. So she said, just reintroduce it next year. So I reintroduced it in February 2020. COVID hit a month later. She called me to say that they were pulling all the bills because they were going to be focused on dealing with COVID. She said, just reintroduce it next year. So I reintroduced it in February 2021. And I knew I had the votes, so I didn't worry about the briefings. We wrote a letter to CMS in DC with a copy of the bill, the governor's veto letter, and the hospital association's opposition letter. And we said, is this true? That they would lose their funding. And they wrote back a month later saying, no, we have no regulations at CMS that prohibit hospitals from having medical cannabis, and no, they would not lose their funding if they did. So I sent that letter to the governor, and when it reached his desk again in September, he signed the bill on September 28th, 2021, and it became a law in California January 1st, 2022, and it's called Ryan's Law. So that's the story of how we got here. We decided that we were going to continue our mission to get Ryan's Law adopted in as many states as possible. 37 states allow medical cannabis in their states, so we're focusing on those 37. Right now, we have about 20 who are considering it. We have a hearing tonight in Oregon. We have a hearing Thursday in Rhode Island. So, and we had a hearing 2 weeks ago in Hawaii. So it is moving. We get a lot of motivation right now to keep working hard at getting it passed in as many states as we possibly can. And I couldn't do it without the help of Ken and Jill. They're just incredible people who have great expertise in this area.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I think what was so profound too for me is the fact that you kept hitting roadblocks in a sense, and you found ways around it, and you didn't let a veto stop you. I also found it amazing that it came out of committee and everyone voted for it. That is incredible. Could you share, just for everyone to fully understand, what exactly does Ryan's Law do? I know you touched on it, but for individuals to fully understand, it gives them access inside a healthcare facility or setting to medical cannabis, correct?
Correct. And the medical cannabis has to be provided by the patient, the family, or caregivers. It's not provided by the hospital. So
Okay.
but the bill requires the hospital, and that's the key word, it requires the hospital to allow terminally ill patients, and that's defined as someone who's expected to die within 6 months, to allow them to use medical cannabis for their treatment or pain relief.
Okay, thank you. Jill, I'd like to bring it over to you for a moment. As a pharmacist and educator, what challenges do healthcare professionals? I know that Jim talked about this a little bit where they were afraid that CMS would cut funding, but what are some of those challenges that healthcare professionals face when it comes obviously to dispensing medical cannabis and whether or not they can inside a healthcare setting?
Well, just to continue what Jim was saying about where that medical cannabis comes from, when you talk about dispensing in medical terms, the traditional sense is a pharmacist providing a drug for a specific patient pursuant to a prescription by a licensed professional. So these are FDA approved drugs that are being dispensed in that traditional sense. However, cannabis is not an FDA approved drug. And so it's in fact, I'm sure are you aware of like the Controlled Substance Act? I don't know how much your audience knows about that, but the DEA regulates some drugs as controlled substances, adding another layer of restrictions, basically. And cannabis is in Schedule 1, which is the most restrictive, in fact, illegal. And simply put, based on the highest potential for abuse or dependence and no current medical accepted use, which isn't really true, as we know. I mean, it sits there alongside LSD, heroin, psilocybin. So there's a few things that probably should be changed. But so anyway, so cannabis, because it lands in this Schedule 1 drug, it's illegal. So a pharmacy cannot provide it. A pharmacist cannot provide it. And patients have to get this from an outside source. So these are dispensaries. I'm sure you are well aware of that are licensed by each state. So that's part of the problem with part of the challenges with healthcare facilities, because they have really no control over it. They have no education on this. They don't know about it. They don't know what to do with it. They're afraid of it. They're afraid of all the federal regulations, like Jim was saying about CMS, the DEA, DEA licenses. So those are some of the challenges that the healthcare facilities face. And because it's kind of this unregulated product that is being brought in by the patient.
Okay. So Ken, turning to you, I know that, I mean, you've worked in medical marijuana advocacy in various states and have done some amazing things with policy. Tuning in and sort of like thinking about what Jim has shared and also what Jill has shared, what are some of those legal and regulatory steps that we can work to address to successfully expand this nationwide in other states? Because I'm sure it is sort of based state by state and what their regulations are, correct? Oh, you're on mute, sorry.
There, that should be better. But thank you so
Yes,
much
it
for
is.
having me this morning. And yeah, so what I say is we exist not because of the FDA or the federal government, we exist in spite of them. And so that's currently the model that we have. You can extrapolate that as far as local as you get, or as far broadly federal, nationally as you can get. We exist in spite of the Schedule 1 that Jill talked about, a moment ago. And I always tell everybody that, listen, the 38 states, the 5 US territories in Washington, D.C. that have a medical cannabis program, we all know that medical cannabis, that people who use cannabis, they use it for a medical reason, whether they know it or not. So you have different regulations in different states. And Ryan's Law will build on all of those states that already have approved cannabis in some form or fashion on a medical level. The problem we run into with hospitals and healthcare facilities generally has to do with federal regulations like Medicare, Medicaid, where hospitals become concerned that they're going to lose the reimbursements. And as Jim pointed out before, we got a letter from the Region 9 director who said they have no interest at all in regulating that or providing any penalties for that. So we're still back. And as far as healthcare practitioners, there may be some in your audience. But what happened was in 1996, when California became the first medical cannabis state, one of the things we avoided was the use of the term prescription, which Jill knows has a specific federally regulated definition, and instead use the word written recommendation.
Mm.
And in 1996, when that was passed, the federal government immediately tried to crush that. And they said any doctor who recommends, even in writing and not a prescription, may lose their DEA, will lose their DEA privileges. And so we litigated that for 3.5 years. We ultimately won. If you're in the professional healthcare business, you have a right under the First Amendment to discuss cannabis with a patient. But I think we had a lot of doctors that got their hands burned and were worried about that. So it's taken years, if not decades, to overcome that. So that's probably the situation Jim confronted when he was in Seattle, when Ryan tragically contracted and was diagnosed with his pancreatic cancer. But we know from a scientific standpoint that cannabis is probably better and certainly safer than opioids in 8 out of 9 pain categories. The only one they do better is basically with surgery. So it wasn't surprising that when we got the form, there's many different varieties and methods of use for cannabis, but when we got a tincture to Ryan that he could use under his tongue or sublingually, that's the second fastest absorption that you have other than smoking it. So the tincture sublingually, it was no surprise that Ryan was able to then converse with his family and friends and be with them the last couple of weeks before he passed. So hopefully I answered your question somewhere in that mass of information.
Yes, you did. I appreciate it. So I think sort of to recap what you were saying around that regulatory, some of the regulatory steps were taken prior and earlier on, and depending on the state, Ryan's law is similar, but you're going back in and educating, informing healthcare providers and I guess policymakers at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And it also, Ryan's Law presents sort of their first opportunity to sort of put the foot in the door, so to speak, as the salesman, foot in the door type analogy, to at least have conventional medicine coexist with cannabis therapeutics. And that just hasn't existed despite all the years and all the research and the U.S. Pain Foundation. You've done such a great job in educating people, which we appreciate very, very much. But for pain, cannabis is really almost a panacea. Worked with thousands of patients with that. So getting that information into medical schools, Jill, of course, does a wonderful job in teaching pharmacy and other health professionals, but we still haven't been able to put ourselves in a position to be able to have conventional medicine accept the wisdom of cannabis.
Yes, I think that's such a great segue to what I was going to actually ask Ellen, because Ellen, as a patient advocate, as somebody who has spent nearly 2 decades advocating for medical cannabis, how do you view Ryan's law as this step toward broader acceptance of medical cannabis in pain and palliative care and being a part of your treatment management and managing your pain?
I believe that Ryan's law is, like Ken was saying, a step to the future. I think people can accept this. To hear that you had 100% success of every single legislator voting in favor of this tells you that they listened, they weren't afraid of judgment, and they had the confirmation this was not going to jeopardize the hospitals and the medical field. And that is a wonderful way to get more acceptance as to what's going on. If it's okay to share, I am a person who is not able to metabolize medication and live with 2 incurable conditions with pain. And the only thing I can take is cannabis or ketamine. And that's it for my entire life. No aspirin, Tylenol, anything. So if I couldn't use cannabis, I probably would not be alive today. So I am incredibly grateful and so excited about, participating and hoping to see every state bring this law into fruition, because we need this. Someone like me going into hospice care, palliative care, right now, I don't have the rights to use cannabis. So how am I supposed to potentially, as I'm getting older and now in my 70s, what happens to me as I move forward in my life? And if this was not accepted. So I thank you all so much from the bottom of my heart to bring awareness to all of us. And I look forward to working with anybody from any state that wants to work with this foundation to try to get this accepted in your state. This should be across the country. And we shouldn't have to battle for this, but right now we do. But this is a battle that's clearly worth the time that's going to go into it. And I can't thank you enough. And Jim, you started this process. Thank you for what you've done for all of us, because you're helping everybody in this country have an option that would not have been there.
Thank you, Ellen. Appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I think that's great. So let's dive a little bit deeper into advocacy now. I know, Jim, you had mentioned it earlier that you are getting this bill introduced in other states. Could you share more about the current status of Ryan's Law in these other states? And maybe also talk a bit about some of the lessons that you learned from California that can help advocates push for this legislation elsewhere.
Well, the good news is that during the California process, those 3 years, we vetted every opposition issue. In other words, hospitals were concerned about the air quality, having smoking and vaping. So we added to the bill there would be no smoking or vaping. It had to be administered some other means. We vetted the issue of the role of the pharmacies in the hospitals, and had actually had a subsequent follow-up bill passed that made sure that the pharmacies were not liable for any patient use. They would not have to, provide the medicine or prescribe it. So there were a number of other issues that were concerned about the CMS issue and losing their funding. We provided a safe harbor clause in the bill that says that if a hospital were to be cited by the federal government for their use of medical cannabis in the hospital, that they would be temporarily removed from having to adhere to the law until that issue was resolved with CMS or with the federal government. So the bill is totally vetted. All issues have been addressed. We have answers for any concerns that comes up, and it's really at this point, as we move it through other states, we've easily addressed all the concerns they might have had previous. So it's being accepted pretty much everywhere we go. Just a matter of getting it through the process.
Ken, do you want to add something to that? Oh, but you are on mute, sorry.
There we go. No, I think Jim did a great job with that. I also would mention that what we did right after Ryan's Law was passed and signed by the governor is that we prepared a whole implementation plan to make it easy for hospitals and other healthcare facilities. You can see a sample of that at cannabisnursesnetwork.com. That's got an exposition treatment of Ryan's Law. It also has how to implement it. So we've sort of answered all the questions on what do you do in the hospital to go ahead and implement it. And so far, we've had great acceptance as far as we can tell in California. No adverse situations as far as we know. And we have Stanford and some others who are very prominent in the area implementing Ryan's Law.
That's fantastic. Jill, from an education perspective, again, what do you think sort of is that biggest misconception? I think you talked about it a little bit about medical cannabis and healthcare, and how can we correct this both from a policy and medical education standpoint?
Yeah, that's a big question.
It is.
You know, to start with Ryan's Law, when we wrote the policies and procedures, and Ken's very similar, we wrote this from a pharmacist perspective so that we could make pharmacists who, are usually in charge of the drugs, comfortable with this. So the protections are in place from the patient keeps their own medical cannabis next to their bedside in a locked container, is responsible for acquiring, removing, administering. So there are some protections there. What we wanted, and we put in our policies, sort of an optional thing, I suppose, is that pharmacists actually assess what the patient is taking and look at it, write it down, and learn about it. I mean, you don't have to touch it, but you can at least try, and then you can help to monitor the dose and the outcome and any side effects or drug interactions. So we're encouraging pharmacists to do that. I think some of there's so many misconceptions because there's been no education because of the Schedule I status. It is not in the curriculum of medical and pharmacy schools. So there's two camps of this is entirely a harmful drug, or this is entirely a harmless drug. It's just a plant. It's perfect. And neither one of those is true. So that's the misconception. And there's it is a medicine and it is a drug. And so there's so many different factors, you know, the dose and the route that people are using it, predispositions to certain conditions, what type of situation people are using it for. For instance, Ken noted that it's for chronic pain, it is not for acute pain. So there are certain situations that it does work better for, and it's not a cure-all, but it can be very useful, very helpful for certain patients. And I think we just have that misconception because we just don't know about it. We just don't know enough, and we just rely on the opiates, which has not been a very, good thing in our country.
For those that are listening that might be healthcare providers, are there places that you would recommend them going to learn more information and to also become involved? And I'll open that up to all three of you to answer as well.
Our group attends, there's several conferences a year. Each pharmacy association has two. So there's a national one and there's a state conference. And our group gives presentations to all of those. Every time there's a conference, then we submit an abstract and we give talks. So we cover a wide range of things. We've covered Ryan's Law. We've covered just how to use cannabis, what the dose is, what the side effects are, that just everything about patient care. So we do a lot like that. If you're in California, then you can, view one of those. But we do have some national conferences. There's just not a whole lot out there right now, but that's what our group is striving to do, is to, keep pushing it out there so that there's more and more education for all healthcare providers.
And I would also recommend, and Jill's would be fabulous. I haven't been able to attend her conference yet, but, and a shameless plug, my organization I developed with my wife, cannabis nurse Heather, 11 years ago, called the Cannabis Nurses Network. They have some brilliant educational material, and they do it in a way where even if you're not a health professional and you're just an interested person, you can get access to literally 40 or 50 hours of educational material that's spoken in a very common sense way, easy to understand. So I would recommend that to anybody, whether they're a health professional or not. Cannabis Nurses Network.
And if I might just jump in,
yeah.
Our group also, we have a website. It's pcccrx.org, and it's fairly rudimentary right now because we still need to hire somebody who's really adept at that instead of me. But there is some information on that, and through that organization, we provide quarterly education nights based around different topics. It's a virtual event, so anybody can join in on those, and those are advertised on that site.
Great, thank you. Ken, I'm going to ask you, because when we talk about sort of policy, and then Jim, please chime in as well. Again, sort of around cannabis education, and I know that I love that you have everything put together, but California is a state that had a lot available already for individuals so that they had access. For people that might be tuning in that aren't in states that have as much access or even access to cannabis, are they going to run into potentially more roadblocks, or how can we ensure that policies like Ryan's Law get passed in those states so that we open the opportunity for more people to have access to compassionate use and compassionate care?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, it starts with an awareness, and it starts with the compassion towards folks who are either terminally ill or have other medical conditions. And it's following in the footsteps of Jim Bartell, who saw this injustice, this inhumanity, and decided that he would take it upon himself after he lost Ryan to make sure this didn't happen to anywhere else. And he provides a pretty good roadmap of how to access our legislators. But you make a good point, Nicole, because like I said, 38 states, 5 U.S. territories, Washington, D.C., we already have that basis for legal medical cannabis. And so from that basis, we can move toward the Ryan's Law in each of those states and other measures to make. So I think Jill might have said something about aspirin or safety of aspirin. Actually, cannabis is probably safer than aspirin because, as Willie Nelson says, the only way you can die from cannabis is if a bale of it drops on your head. And that's true. And that's true from a scientific standpoint. But I think for those of us in your audience and in your foundation and others who may see this later on, just get involved. Contact your own legislator. Ask them on a local level, please ensure that we have the same rights as they have in California when we have a terminally ill patient who needs cannabis.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn it to you now, Jim. How can people find out if there is legislation that's already been introduced into their state around Ryan's Law? And then how can they reach out and contact you to get more involved?
We have we set up a Ryan's Law Foundation a couple of months ago. It's now online. It's ryanslawfoundation.org, and we keep that updated with our most recent successes in different states where we're prioritizing how people can get involved, or they can call me directly or text me at 619-787-0333. And but we're working right now in about 20 states actively, where we've actually identified legislators who want to not only support but also author Ryan's Law in their legislatures. Michigan is moving forward, Rhode Island, Oregon, Colorado, Hawaii, Pennsylvania. I was on the phone 2 days ago with a legislator from Pennsylvania. He's going to author a bill. Maryland talked to me yesterday again. They're authoring a bill, and we're working in Vermont. Those are the key states right now that are the most active. It's a total of about 20 states that have an interest in pursuing it this year.
That's incredible. Let's say I go to your site and my state is not listed, and I want to take an active role in helping maybe introduce this. Is that just reaching out again through ryanslawfoundation.org? And
probably the best way would be to call me or text me.
Okay.
Because it changes every day. I mean, we're I'm on the phone every day with legislators from all over the country, and we're focusing on legislators who are on the health committees in each state, because the process for a bill is you introduce it, it goes to the House Speaker, the Speaker assigns it to a committee. Because of this bill, it always goes to the Health Committee. So we focus on Health Committee members. I usually call and talk to the chairs and co-chairs of each healthcare committee, both the Senate and the House. And if we get them on board, then it's usually a much easier path to get it to the system if you have the health committee chairs sponsoring the bill.
Nicole, could we have Jim repeat that phone number for us, please?
It's 619-787-0333.
Okay, thank you.
Ellen, I'm going to turn it quickly to you. Again, as an individual living with incurable diseases, somebody who has advocated for cannabis for so long, how important is it for individuals with lived experience to get involved and utilize their voice in this process?
That's what I was actually going to ask you, if I could just share. Your voice and your story is the most important thing you can possibly share with your legislators. We worked back in 2006 to get cannabis approved in Rhode Island. And it wasn't as difficult as you would think. When people sat, and we had people lined out the door waiting for their turn, and they listened to each story. When people sat and shared those stories, I'm telling you, the legislators listened. They became extremely compassionate, and your story makes a difference. You can send a letter into the editor, do an op-ed, you can talk about it, there's just so many ways to share that story, but people do care. There are a lot of very compassionate people in this world, and I was shocked how rapidly we were able to get it approved in Rhode Island, and it was through voices like yours out there sharing the story and how it could turn your life around. This is an option that can help you with pain relief, help you with quality of your life, and help with the end of your life. And it's just something that everybody should have the right to have. And it's heartbreaking right now to realize in certain states people are still struggling and don't have access, or their states approved it, but there's no dispensaries, and it shouldn't be that way. So we need to help each other out and move forward together. And here at the U.S. Pain Foundation and Ryan's Law Foundation, we're here to help. And I think we should take advantage of this opportunity to really try to turn each state in the right direction.
So well said. So before we turn it over to Q&A, so those tuning in, if you have questions, please put them in. I want to hear just rapid fire from each one of you. What is the final takeaway that you want our audience to remember about Ryan's Law, its impact on terminally ill patients, or how they can get involved? And Ellen, I'm actually going to just start with you.
That your voice matters, that we should have a dignity at the end of our life as we should have during our lifetime. And this is an opportunity to provide that for everybody in this country. And I think we all need to work together to make this happen. And I am so impressed with a person losing his son, turning this around and doing something that's helping everybody in this entire country. And Jim, to this day, I can't thank you enough to opening the door for all of us to have this opportunity to have better quality of life and end of life. So thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ellen. Ken.
I would say that just my largest takeaway is for those of you who have not explored cannabis therapeutics, understand that all cannabis is medical cannabis, and everyone who uses it for a medical reason, whether they know it or not. That it's safe and effective for multiple different conditions, as I proved in court before. And certainly when we get to patients who are in later stages of life or in hospice, this is a very healing, natural, botanical remedy that can do just like it did for Ryan, and that is give him time to be with the beautiful family, the Bartell family that he knew and loved. And always been proud to work with Jim, who is a hero in my mind, and to make this available to others in the country going forward.
Thank you. Jill?
Well, I would say I'll be really quick. Increase awareness, talk about it so that we can lose the stigma, which is one of the biggest barriers. And just to echo what Ellen and Ken said, it's about compassion. You know, it's not about anything else. So that's what I have.
Thank you. Jim?
I think there's one irony in all this too that we haven't talked about, and that's that fentanyl kills about 75,000 people a year, and yet it's okay to have fentanyl in a hospital, treat patients with for pain, but it's illegal. Not illegal, but the policies in most hospitals are to not allow it in the hospital. For medical cannabis, it's a drug that has never killed anyone. Like Ken said, you have to drop a bale of marijuana on somebody to kill them. People don't die of medical marijuana. They die of fentanyl, and yet that's considered an allowable hospital drug, and it's used probably way too much for treating pain when you had this option available. In terms of Ryan's Law moving forward, it has great momentum right now. This is probably the most active we've been in terms of reaching out to states. What people can do is, contact me, let me know what state you're in, and we'll get you involved in those states. Some are more active than others, but it's picking up momentum literally every day. And I'm committed to seeing this through. It's a mission. It's a legacy for Ryan. It gives some meaning to his death. and it's therapy for me to see this through. So I want to thank everyone for whatever you can do to help out. Just feel free to contact me at any time, and we'll get you involved in continuing this effort nationwide.
Thank you so much. I just want to say how moved I am by your commitment and your dedication and the ripple effect Ryan's life is having on millions of individuals all over. I applaud you, and for everyone that is tuning in, if there is a way that you can get involved to utilize your voice to advocate, to become an ally, let's make sure that we can continue to see Ryan's Law passed in state after state after state. One question I had actually as you guys were talking, if cannabis became federally legal, is there a path to explore to make Ryan's Law a federal law? And I'm not sure who I should address that to, so I'm just going to leave it open-ended.
I mean, it's just like crazy to almost ask the question now because we're in such a state of flux. But it's a great
Right.
question, Nicole. But we're in a great state of flux because recently, at the end of the Biden administration, they'd recommended that it be moved to a Schedule III drug. There's a whole
Right.
bunch we could spend another hour on that. We won't. But now we've got a new administration and it's put the brakes on that completely. So we have no idea where we're going to go. All we know right now is what we have. And I'm guessing that what we have may be all we can have for another number of years. But it is at this point, at least, it is legal to the extent that we continue to have Congress include the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, which is a crazy little thing that prevents the federal government from trying to enforce their drug policies in states that already have a medical program or a legal adult program. But yeah, it's going to be interesting going forward to see exactly how we land. But as far as Ryan's Law, we'll be able to add that to any state that has any type of regulated medical or adult legal program.
Okay. A question that I did receive was for anyone who doesn't have a personal connection to terminal illness, is their advocacy still helpful? And Jim, you and I had a conversation sort of offline just about that in general.
So what's the question again? I'm sorry.
For someone who doesn't have a personal connection
See.
to
Okay.
a terminal illness, is their advocacy still helpful?
Well, I mean, at some point, we're all going to be in a similar position
Right.
and be terminally ill. And there may be many, many cases, literally millions of cases where medical cannabis provided by Ryan's Law will be a benefit to them, to all of us. So even though there's no personal connection today, there will be at some point in their lives, either themselves or a loved one, a friend. So it has great potential for helping people get through these very difficult situations where they want to have closure with their loved ones.
Nicole, could I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
Okay. I'm here in Rhode Island. Our bill is coming up for hearing on Thursday. So my question to the foundation is, you talked about things that you vetted, that you took care of, that should calm down those questions that are going to be coming up. My question to you is, are you going to be at this testimony on Zoom to share this information, or is that something I should bring up when I go in to testify?
I talked to Susan Donovan, who's sponsoring the bill in Rhode Island. She's chair of the House Health Committee, and they don't have the ability to allow Zoom testimony.
Okay.
So she's on all of us who want to send written testimony. You can go online to their state webpage, and there's a provision for submitting written testimony, which we're all doing from our end.
Okay, great.
So I would encourage people who have an interest in Rhode Island or have friends there to go ahead and submit written testimony in support of the bill. It's Senate Bill, let's see, 3062, I believe.
Right now it's in the House. I wrote it down. Let's see. It's H5630.
Okay, yes, sir. 5630. Okay.
Okay.
So
So-
another question that was great. Thanks, Ellen, was if your state doesn't have cannabis or medical cannabis legalized, is there a way to move this bill forward in that state? Are there restrictions or requirements? Because some states don't have a cannabis law available as of now.
I think that would be very challenging in one of
Okay.
the states.
Well, yeah,
So
it's
Okay,
balance
yeah.
of,
it's difficult
balance
enough
of
to
the
get.
states have a CBD only. So
Yeah,
you have
Correct.
basically 38 states,
Yes.
but another 10 have a CBD cannabidiol only. And so you really in those states have to push for them to adopt a medical program at the very least before it will be largely more effective. So you can do all the research, and I've spent tons of time researching cannabis. In every scientific or medical journal that you read that covers it, they'll tell you that CBD is good, THC is good, but the two combined are generally better. And that's literally a consensus if you review the medical literature. So typically when we're working even with pain or anything else, we're talking about the ability to use some THC.
Okay.
we're hoping that by focusing on the 38 states where it's legal, that we can create the momentum to get the other 12 states to change their laws to make it legal, and then they can incorporate, Ryan's law in those states. But we have talked to those states, but because there is some interest by certain legislators in those states to do something, but it's just too much of a barrier at this point to spend a lot of time on when we have 38 states that really want to do this.
Okay. Until Ryan's law is passed in their state, and because it is passed in California, are individuals allowed to cross state lines and seek care in California? Are there any restrictions or requirements around that where they actually have to be a resident of that state?
No, if you're in the state of California, you're entitled to all the benefits, protections, privileges, and immunities as you are if you're from some other state or if you're a resident of the state.
But you do have to have a California authorized medical marijuana card. So
Oh,
you
yeah.
do have to go through the program, and I mean, you can get it from another state, but I don't know. I don't know the specifics about the Department of Cannabis of California, how they authorize those medical marijuana cards. But that is one of the conditions of Ryan's
But
law.
if you are an adult, if you're 21 or older, you can access the same cannabis medicine as if you had a medical card, which is for those who are under 21.
Oh, that's true.
And in
Right.
California, you can get a medical card with a telephonic conference, telemedicine, so to speak, in about 10 minutes, typically.
In the state of Rhode Island, they respect any person coming from out of state with a medical card going into a dispensary and using it within the state. So I'm assuming you probably have that in your state of California?
They're all
No.
different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I know we're getting close on time, so I first just wanted to say thank you for giving of your time so freely. I think a few big things is we need education. We need to have more conversations around cannabis, the need for it. We need to utilize our voices. We need to reach out to our representatives and make sure that they know that this is important and this matters to us, and not only just to us, but how we need it for society. We need to have access to compassionate care. So for anyone that is tuning in, please know that you matter. Please know that your voice and what you say matters. Please get involved. Please seek out more education. Go to ryanslawfoundation.org. You could reach out at any time to Jim to get more information. Also, you could reach out to uspainfoundation.org. We can make sure that we connect you to the right people. To kind of close up, I know I said the final takeaway, but I just want to leave it again to our panelists. If there's any final things you would just like to make sure everybody knows.
I would like to say that for those people in the states that are backwards and are not caught up to the rest of us that have medical use in their state, I don't want you to give up. I want you to reach out. We want to help you. And your story it's going to matter. And we just have to keep continuing with that battle to get your state to finally listen and turn around. I don't want you to give up. I want you to help advocate and fight for your state, because in time it will change. It's work, but your voice is going to make a big difference in that. So we're here if you need us. Thanks.
And I would just add that I was a caregiver for my dad, who suffered, was terminally ill with cancer and then dementia. And so I used cannabis with him very successfully. And it made the last days, last weeks of his life so much easier. And I would tell folks is that my dad, when I was younger, taught me how to play bridge, which is kind of like a nerdy thing to do, but I learned, and we would play a lot. And even at 91 years old with dementia, when he had his cannabis, we actually would go play in the senior centers around the area where he was then living and play bridge together. And it would literally, I would say to folks, dealing with patients with dementia, is to at least give it a try, if you're a caregiver for someone with that, because it gives them just a better quality of life. And so that my personal message for that particular condition is something, really check that out.
Thank you.
I'll go.
Yes.
I'm happy to share our policies and procedures. They're for California hospitals, so it might not, there's, it might need some tweaking, but if anybody wants those, they can contact me and I'd be happy to share those.
Thank you.
I want to thank Nicole and Ellen for putting this webinar together. I encourage people listening to get involved. Contact me, and we'll find a way to make your time worthwhile. Just it's all about building the momentum and committing to it and seeing the mission through.
Well, thank you, Jim. I just want to say thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing Ryan with us. Thank you for the countless hours that you are putting in to make sure that other individuals have the ability to access cannabis and have those special moments at the end of their lives. It truly means a lot to Jill and to Ken and to Ellen. Thank you for sharing your expertise and giving so freely of your time and the education you are providing, the dedication to helping all of us. We are just greatly appreciative. So to everyone that is tuning in, we really are grateful that you are here. We hope that you get involved. We really hope you understand how important your voice is and how taking action can make a significant difference. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at uspainfoundation.org or reach out directly to ryanslawfoundation.org. Thank you all for being here. And until next time, be well and take care. Thank you.